Sure, is the recording in progress? Beautiful. Then I wish everybody best of luck in this final, and I invite the Prime Minister to open up this debate for us. Here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, POI is in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, on the framing, we believe that we have to prove that this is usually the rational choice of an average individual within the society. We don't know who this individual is, what their socioeconomic background is, or whatever. We're just going to presume that we are talking about your average Joe who is not too poor, not too rich, and all these sorts of things. What does marrying for utility mean? It usually means that you are trying to like find certain traits in humans that are convenient to you, and that you are searching for someone who is going to be the lifelong partner with you, like someone who has well-established job, someone who has money, who has good credit score, someone who is like similar with your like ideology and values, who is going to be able to like raise children well with you, etc., etc. Why do we believe that love is something that is like not so good, and like why do we believe that it's not good to marry someone and make this kind of decision based on love? And notice that this is something that is already preemptively going to be engaging with the strongest opposition's argument, because what we are going to, because even if opposition manages to prove that like there is some kind of like flimsy, philosophical, emotional, squishy-washy stuff, like why love is important and all these sorts of things, we will have two preemptives to this. Notice that number one, love, their opposition will be unable to claim those impacts because love is something that is unlikely to last, and it usually fades away. We can see that literally empirically, vast majority of relationships ends up in breakup, vast majority of marriages end up in divorce, and all these sorts of things. But secondly, on our side of the house, you are still able to experience love. You are just not going to clarification. Yes.
Sorry, because I asked this as a motion clarification, but I didn't get a real answer. You mean utility as in like usefulness to you, right? Not like joy, but usefulness to you.
Yeah, okay. Secondly, I think that like the reason why love is something that they're unable to claim exclusively on their side of the house is because on our side of the house, you're still likely going to crave love and want to experience it to a certain extent. So probably what happens on our side of the house is that you're just like pushing when you are going to get married. Like you want to experience love when you are in high school, when you are young, and all these sorts of things. And you're just going to like be experiencing all these flimsy, fuzzy emotions and all these sorts of things. But later in life, you will marry for utility. Thirdly, the norm of like open marriage is something that, you know, can still exist. And if you are marrying a partner for someone who is like for the utility, you can like still have like passionate sex outside of the marriage if this is something that you really want. Okay, firstly, let's talk about why love is something that isn't good and why it's likely to fade away. Firstly, why do people fall in love in the first place? You fall in love with someone because you're interested in them, like you're interested in their personality, you're interested in how they look like, how they make you feel, and all these sorts of things. And the reason why these feelings are unlikely to stay is because these feelings are something that is very volatile. So love is usually based on the feelings that you're having right now in the moment. You may be attracted to different things in different points of time. Like, for example, when you are young, you may fall in love with someone who is giving you like adrenaline rush, or like if you're having good sex with someone, you may like confuse these chemicals and withdrawal symptoms. Like for missing this person, you may confuse these things for love and all these sorts of things. And it's also very hard to like pinpoint when you actually love someone, or like when you are actually, you know, like just like contingent on them, when it's like a toxic relationship or whatever. As you grow, those things are changing rapidly and they're varying. Like, for example, just look at who you were dating when you were 15, when you were 20, like you would want to vomit right now, like you were in love, who you were crying for, and all these sorts of things. Like you would feel like super embarrassed right now about all these sorts of things. This is why like people essentially do grow apart at some point of life. And the reason for this is because you do not have epistemic access towards your future preferences and towards your future emotional state of mind. Why is this why? And then opposition might say, but like utility can also change throughout the life. The thing is, the comparative utility is something that you are much better to predict and able to rationalize. Why is this so? Because utility often usually is a universal thing. Like everyone obviously wants, you know, to have money, to have some kind of like stability, to have someone who they are going to be able to raise children with, and all these sorts of things. Secondly, you're going to be approaching utility from a rational point. You're able to like mathematically calculate it and all these sorts of things. While feelings is something that you are it's very often hard to pinpoint how you are feeling about someone. Like even like when you think that you are liking someone, it is very hard to like acknowledge yourself whether you love this person or what this is. So it's very hard to like mathematically dramatically like describe it and all these sorts of things. What are the negative impacts of this? Firstly, marriage is going to last shorter on their side of the house. Why is this harmful? Two things. Firstly, it is just the process of divorce is just harmful. If you have, how you say, kids with this person, this is going to be traumatizing experience for kids. Secondly, going through divorce may impoverish you. Like your wife may take you everything, your money and your earnings and all these sorts of things, or like your husband, and like you can like go through like spend so much money on lawyers and all these sorts of things. Secondly, notice, and this is important argument, it is an incredibly emotionally charged and damaging experience when someone is falling out of love with you, or when you are falling out of love with them. Why is this so? Because when someone is falling out of love with you, and that is the basis for the divorce, you are going to question yourself and your self-worth. You are going to think that there is something that is intrinsically unlovable and problematic with you. This is going to erode your self-worth. But when someone doesn't love you, this is especially painful because this is something that is unfixable. You can be good looking, you can, how you say, have money, all these sorts of things, all of the things that you are able to affect, and someone can still not love you. This is going to like erode your self-worth because you are not going to be able to pinpoint it, understand it. Why? You're just going to think that there is something that is intrinsically problematic with you, and this is going to like impair your ability to like date further down the line and all these sorts of things. And this is something that is traumatizing and incredibly bad. Why is utility better on the comparative? Notice that we are talking about the long-term traits that the individual is likely to have, and you're also going to be less pressure to settle down. So like you are going to, like, as long as you don't need partner, you are not going to, you know, how you say, settle down until you are like 35, 40, and you want to have children and you want to settle down and all these sorts of things. So which means that you can seek out traumatic connection with people prior to the marriage. Why are you likely going to be able to get along with the person that you are seeking just for the utility purposes? Before I get into that, POI from closing.
Actually, never mind. Keep going.
Okay, so why you're likely to be able to get along when you're, because on our side of the house, you just have to cohabit with someone. If you are able to co-live with each other, you just have to like get along like roommates. Like you have to be able to bond over things, like shared experiences. And you also like, how you say, you probably, how you say, are able to communicate things better. Secondly, why you are going to be able to get over fights better? Because you are more likely to approach them rationally rather than, how you say, with emotion. Because like when, for example, like my husband isn't washing the dishes, I'm going to think this is attack on me, and this is how you say, like, because he doesn't love me, and I'm going to feel bad and all these sorts of things. What are the concrete impacts on our side of the house? Firstly, you will probably be richer on our side of the house because you're not going to marry some leech because you think that they love you and all these sorts of things. Why should you weigh this argument massively? Firstly, money is prerequisite for everything good in life. It gives you access to the hedonistic experiences that are making life worthwhile, like going to fancy restaurants and all these sorts of things. Secondly, it is increasing your agency, your ability to do what you think. But thirdly, it gives you a sense of emotional and psychological comfort. You do not have to worry about tomorrow, about credit or bills and all these sorts of things. This is why this is already debate winning argument, but we also prove to you why you're going to have more emotional stability overall. For all of these reasons, love sucks, marry for utility.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for what was a very fine speech, and I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for OG. Here.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Great. Cool. To commit one's life to someone on the basis of a feeling you feel in the now is to consign yourself to lack of freedom and imprison your future self to horror. I'm going to respond to Eli and then rebuild everything Paula said. The first thing I want to talk about is Eli's claim that you can compare your romantic partners to who you love in order to figure out which one is the most utile. Ignoring the fact that for a minute, this sounds a lot like our side of the house because utility weighing is what we do. It's also already preemptively beaten by Paula when she says that you are unlikely to make decisions rationally when you have strong feelings for that individual. But even if you attempt to, and Eli says you probably can, we have a wider pool of emotional partners to choose from because we're not discriminating on the arbitrary basis of whether or not we have feelings for that individual. So insofar as Eli thinks within the potential partners you could have romantic feelings for, you can engage in utility maximizing decisions, we can do the same thing, just with a wider pie of potential partners who might have other qualities that outweigh on utility. So insofar as that's good, we're obviously winning on this trade-off in the debate. Secondly, Eli says that relationships on our side involve abuse and coercion. Look, I hate to say this, but it's genuinely symmetric in the round. Unfortunately, we don't live in a Barbie world. The patriarchy is still a thing, and there's still a lot of sexist discrimination. Many societies are still quite conservative, but obviously it's the opposite, right? If anything, right? You're more likely to stay in a toxic relationship on their side because you love this person, or you loved this person and remember the times you loved them. The comparative is on our side. If utility calculus ever shifts against you and your utile husband becomes abusive, you can leave them and you don't have to continue to engage in a relationship with them over a prolonged period of time. So it's easier to leave on our side rather than harder in the context where people are most desperate, though I still posit this as a minority of relationships, and it's not something opening opposition can win the debate on. Thirdly, Eli says that when you marry for utility, people will feel bad about this because of socio-cultural messaging around what marriage should be, because of religion, society, and things like that. The first and most obvious response to this is you don't have to tell anyone you don't love your husband, right? It's not like at social gatherings you have to blurt out that you're not in love and you're married to this person for convenience. Plausibly, if this socio-cultural messaging exists and you're worried about judgment, you can modulate a response in this way. But even if you did end up admitting it, you likely surround yourself with like-minded people, right? People tend to sort out based on things like economic strata, social strata, values, things like this. So you're likely to surround yourself with people who are going to be accepting of your decision-making calculus, because most people in adult life don't want to be surrounded by people who are going to be incredibly toxic to them. But thirdly, there's a lot of counter-societal messaging as well, right? Like how non-conventional types of marriage exist and are valid as well, like things like asexual marriage, which isn't necessarily based around a romantic bond, for example, or things like long-term cohabitation, whereby people are effectively platonic already, which is very similar to what we're doing on our side. So I don't think insofar as these things exist and are becoming more accepted in society due to things like the broad trend of liberalization in wider society, that this is likely to be something that is so stigmatized. But if it is, you can probably conceal it or hide it. Fourthly, I'm unclear that experiencing love is mutually exclusive, even if you can't explore an open relationship, which I posit in many cases you can. You can get this from friends, family, pets, and so on. There are tons of other sources of validation in life that aren't relationships. So even in the absence of romantic love, I just reject the assertion that you cannot have those things. Note that every individual's interior world is different, and not everyone puts the same premium on romantic affection as other people do. It might be the most important thing in someone's life, but it's not necessarily the most important thing in mine or yours. And as an individual, we have to aggregate out to defaulting to the most groups of people. So I'm unclear it's the case that you can't experience equally fulfilling sources of love from other things in life, like you're from your children or something like that. But finally, I just reject the idea that people on our side can't make sacrifices or engage in shared commitments. Eli says your partner won't bring you baba or things like this, but if you live with a person for a prolonged period of time, you're likely to become a ton to their concerns and things like this and still give them these kinds of feelings, because even if you don't have romantic feelings to them, you're likely to appreciate this person deeply on a deep personal level. You're likely to understand and want the best for them. So it's likely that you still pay attention or are still reasonably attentive to them throughout the relationship. I want to quickly frame when this choice is made before rebuilding our constructive. I think this choice is made at the opt-in point into a relationship with the intent to marry. And then of course, it's also made at the point of marriage to answer the CGPOI. So I think that this choice is something that you consciously engage in, but it's not a choice that you make at the beginning of entering into relationships necessarily. Probably the case, countervailing narratives like hookup culture and the idea you should experiment and have sex with people before you get married still exist on either side of the house. Plausibly, you're not just going to jump into marriage with the first person you ever date or whatever. So it's reasonably certain that the opt-in point happens across multiple stages. Why is this a better choice for the individual? I think the first way we win this clash is we explain that you're more likely to have a successful and longer lasting marriage. The reason this is good is because longer marriage gets you things like access to pooled income, a stable environment to raise children, a stable environment to pursue your hobbies and career and things like this. But successful and stable marriage also secondly means you're exposed to less emotional volatility throughout the course of your life, which is good for your mental and physical health, right? You're not exposed to stress or fear or other kinds of things. But thirdly, longer marriage means you don't have to go through divorce court and so on, or the crushing realization that your marriage is being separated as frequently. What did we tell you here? First, we told you that romantic feelings are fickle. People fall in love for all kinds of reasons. They might be drawn to someone over looks or how someone makes them feel, or something more intangible or harder to describe, because every individual's interior world experiences romantic love differently. The problem with this is it's genuinely very fickle and is subject to changing over time and changing to degrees of experience. What this means, and Paula proves this, is that it is impossible for the cost-benefit calculus on Eli's side to be rational, because insofar as this experience is so intersubjective, it is unclear that you're ever able to make this utility maximizing decision in the way they want to talk about. But secondly, romantic and passionate feelings are often driven by impulse rather than conscious decisions. I want to illustrate this for you. It's about what you feel for someone in the moment. It's about the adrenaline rush when you talk to someone, or the adrenaline rush when you share your first kiss with your partner, or something like this. These things are things you experience in the moment, rather than something you experience on a conscious and rational decision. So insofar as that's driven by impulse, I have no idea why you're able to utility maximize out who is best you're able to get married to. But even if you can, I posit you're able to do it better on our side of the house. Before I explain the comparative, I'd like to engage with closing.
So I think that utility decisions can also be emotive, like people who date a boy because he's got a cool car. So I guess, how does that affect your case? Is that not really damning?
No, utility decisions aren't emotive by definition, because utility decisions are your weighing cost-benefit calculus on the basis of other things. Sure, you can make a wrong utility calculus and end up in a wrong marriage, but that's mutually exclusive. We're saying the inexclusive. We're saying the comparative likelihood of you ending up in a relationship that's bad for you is far less when you're evaluating based on other traits that are less short-term, right? Because things like money, things like jobs, things like income, things like whether or not you think this person's going to be a good father to your children are more constant than romantic love, which we've already proven is fairly fickle. Why does this enable to do better on our side? Firstly, the comparative with a marriage of utility means you can plan things out better with this choice in mind, but you can also select better choices that are more conducive to long-term marriages, and fights that happen are less likely to be severe, right? But also statistically, I just posit more people get married on our side, right? You're unlikely to have feelings for someone who's objectively perfect match for you, right? Even if they're perfect matches psychologically for you in other ways. This helps you solve that problem where we match people with better outcomes, at least at the individual level where this motion takes place. But secondly, I think you make better choices of other elements in your life. Paula tells you when you approach marriage from the perspective of utility, you need to spend a longer time considering who to marry, which means you are able to search longer for them, which means you get better off outcomes because you're able to explore your preferences more. We also told you that it's like you're able to see other people that you have short-term romantic feelings for, and outside of marriage, it's easier to negotiate when you're clearly about a marriage of utility. The impact of this is very clear. You have better capacity to raise children and fulfill social norms. Eli says you won't care about the person, but insofar as you bond similar practice and similar preferences and value systems, I have no idea why you don't feel that way. The best case for opposition is that there's something about love that makes it worth pursuing, even if the case is unstable. They cannot show this, and even if they can, I'm fine with trading off the highest highs of emotions for more relevant means of happiness. Incredibly proud to stand in OG.
I thank the GLO for what was a very fine speech, and I invite the member of government to open up the debate for bottom half. Here.
Fantastic. I'll take POIs in chat, please. Probably around 5. All right, cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Opening half confuses the act of marriage with the institution of marriage. And the case at closing government will come in 2 parts, both very simple. The real change in this debate is not on the sorts of relationships you enter into. In fact, our claim will be that you still have relationships with people who you love passionately on both sides of the house. The question is which type of relationship is better suited specifically to entering into the legal and religious contract that is marriage. That's how we'll win the debate. First extension, you get love and passion better on our side of the house. What does opening government say here? They rightly note that you probably still, for example, engage in hookup culture prior to marrying and very plausibly have an open marriage. This is the tip of the iceberg, and there's a much stronger argument out there. When you enter into a marriage of utility, you fundamentally redefine, both for yourself and as nature, what the role of marriage is. At its core, marriage is a legal contract. It involves, for example, cohabitation, raising children, managing finances, taking out a mortgage, living in a house. Importantly, on our side of the house, you engage in the institution of marriage simply for those ends, entering into a marriage, into a contract specifically, because it is utile for you. But importantly, that does not by any means preclude you from simply having romantic relationships well outside of the relationship in your marriage. This is not just opening government's argument on open marriages, to be clear. It's more fundamentally about the differing nature of your relationship. It's not like both marriages on both sides of the house are the same and you're just plopping a different person into them. It's that you fundamentally are having a different type of marriage on our side of the house. Why is that likely? Because both parties in a utile marriage, you and your spouse, almost assuredly know that you are entering into a marriage of utility, not just because it's probably a necessity for you to confide in your partner that this is a marriage of necessity or utility, but also because it's probably impossible to have a functioning utile marriage in which you pretend to love someone deeply when the reality that undergirds your relationship is one of utility. That means both sides acknowledge that you still ought to have loving and passionate relationships outside the marriage. You still should have sex with other people whom you love. And the nature of your relationship is not the nature opening opposition describes. But additionally, when you enter into a marriage of utility, your internal understanding of marriage changes, because opening opposition's arguments simply do not apply on our side of the house. You don't think of yourself as entering into the marriage where you have a big wedding ceremony. Think of this person as the love of your life just in disguise. You think of this marriage as a legal contract. This importantly narrows the debate, Because on both sides of the house, overwhelmingly, you will have acceptance from your partner and an internal willingness to have both types of relationships. The difference is that you have your marriage partner be one of utility, and outside of the legal confines of marriage, you have a partner whom you love very deeply. But love is much better on our side of the house in three important ways. The first is that we compartmentalize the activities of relationships. The biggest problem with love-based marriages is you pack far too much into a single relationship. You are supposed to love this person, to have sex with this person, to raise children with this person, to manage finances with this person. And the vast majority of healthy, loving relationships that people self-select into smartly fall apart, not because the love fades, but because those non-love-based factors, like kids being jerks, for example, or your partner losing their job, get in the way of love. On our side of the house, we compartmentalize relationships. You have one partner specifically whose job is to be with you, raising kids and cooking meals. You have a different partner whose job it is to love you, to provide you with sexual and physical attention. This is good because the more eggs you put in one basket, namely having one marriage in which all of your life hangs, the more likely it is that even small ruptures in that relationship cascade outward. That when you, for example, fall out of love with your husband, but that husband is also the person to whom you have a joint bank account, are owning the same house with, and are raising children with, that's when your entire life falls apart, because leaving that person also means leaving your children. It means leaving your finances. This also means on our side of the house, the barriers to leaving relationships are much lower because there is less riding on each individual relationship because you've bifurcated the utility components of marriage and the love components of marriage. This dramatically mitigates the intensity of opening opposition's benefit in explaining how you still get love, sex, passion on our side of the house, but your relationships, both utility and loving, are likely to be healthier when you focus on the specific strengths of those institutions and those relationships. You're not pretending to love your utility partner, you're simply engaging in them for utility's sake. Before I move on into our second extension and explain what the trade-off realistically looks like,
Yeah, so if you just need to separate sex and banking, why is this not something you can do in a love relationship, since one of you isn't trying to control the other to maximize utility, and neither of you has that leverage, and both of you are more understanding to each other because you love each other?
No, it's the opposite. Like, your partner gets way more mad on your side of the house if you have sex with someone else because it's called, cheating. And more importantly, it's on our side of the house that control is less of an issue because by nature, the relationship is one of utility. So when you leave, you're no longer saying, I no longer love you as a person. I no longer find you attractive as a person. Your claim is simply, this marriage has run its course. It is no longer pro-utility for us. And much in the same way that running practical utilitarian arguments works much better in debate than running wacky emotional principles, so too does it apply to relationships. Second extension, where does this, sorry, Dylan. Second extension, where does this trade-off apply? This motion presumes you are picking between love and utility. In the vast majority of cases, for the vast majority of people, they actually don't trade off. Why is that? The vast majority of relationships emerge from people with very similar backgrounds, especially because of social ostracization, whereby similar types of people live in similar types of areas. Most marriages, for example, have two people with similar income levels. They share the same religious belief. They have similar political ideologies. They're often living in the same area and hence are employed in similar vocations. Think, for example, agriculture or industrial manufacturing. And furthermore, in the lead up to marriage on either side of the house, which this motion does not meaningfully affect, if you truly love someone, you often attempt to adjust and accommodate your life to ensure that you can have a utility marriage with them. You move states, for example, to be with your girlfriend. You make adjustments to your lifestyle to ensure the relationship can continue. So there's an important question that then needs to be asked. If the vast majority of relationships and marriages do not require a trade-off, where does this trade-off exist? And it usually exists when there are structural factors well beyond your personal control that preclude the love of your life from also being utile with you. What does that look like? Familial pressure, whereby, for example, you want to marry someone of a different ethnic group, but your father will disapprove and oust you from the family. Sociocultural or even legislative barriers, for example, that prohibits you from having loving relationships with the people with which you wish to engage in. This comprises the vast majority of cases in which there is a trade-off. There are structural factors holding you back, denying you the ability to enter into that relationship. Now, our claim is not that you cannot marry for love on their side of the house, but that marrying for love involves an extremely high trade-off. Your family disowning you, you losing your inheritance, being denied access to financial resources, being shunned by your community. This should outweigh top half alone, because marriage alone is never worth such a huge sacrifice, and picking the utility side simply allows you to limit that harm. And given that you have many other relationships outside marriage, friends and children, having money and social stability matters to those relationships as well. We propose.
Speech will start at my first word. Okay, before I go into like telling us why our extension wins out, right? Let me just point out like a strategic commentary about opening half, right? OG's out of the debate because they don't question the institution of marriage, which itself is the debate, right? They say picking marriage for utility gives more utile benefit, which is of course a tautology and unreasonably trivial burden to pick up. The fact here is they cannot argue without arguing about the institution of marriage itself and the changes, widespread changes they have on society, and rather argue that, oh, of course, like marriage for utility gives more utile benefit. I don't think that's the aspect of this debate. O is out of the debate because they concede utility is a fair metric to weigh this choice by. So they by themselves concede that utility is fundamentally important. I think on that aspect, they're losing. But note that OP, OO, and CO say that love is important, glamorized, and easy to find. But yes, we as CG agree. Our extension says that you get love better when it's not burdened by the practical constraints of marriage. So we can agree with both op teams and still achieve those benefits, right? We sidestep O's and CO's arguments and expectations. They say there's a social and religious norm to marry on the basis of love. But on our side, you are entering a conventional marriage. Matt says, don't tell people you aren't in love. We say there's no need to advertise that you're even married. CG says, embrace marriage as a contract and extract value from that contract. This relationship, marriage as an institution, this debate is about if marriage should be for utility or if for love. And our factor here is marriage as an institution, as a contract that exists, as it is seen in society and as how people practice it, should be fundamentally based for utility. Because often at times you try to associate love with it, but you try to acknowledge utility, you don't achieve anything, and then you don't like end up in a very weird place where you're not able to achieve love. That is, maybe you love someone, but maybe you're not able to get utile benefits from them. And then you're constantly trying to put this pressure on them, constantly trying to gain the most out of it without the ability to know if you actually love them. So the fact ends up happening on their side of the house, on the opposite side of the house, is you don't actually get love. It's not love for you. You cannot even understand if it is love or not, right? Note our extension is debate winning. We outweigh the top half quite cleanly through our framing. OG and OO go back and forth on what sort of relationship, one of love, one of utility. Both have their merits. We explain you can get both, and why both love and utility are done better when they're compartmentalized into different relationships, right? And note that this is not like a high burden argument. That is like, this is the aspect of the debate. That is, what should the institution of marriage be in the society? So it's not about changing norms. It's about questioning the very fundamental of what marriage exists. And I think like we are fair here to say that like marriage as an institution should just have this aspect, right? What does Ryan tell you? Ryan tells you that when you have marriage as an institution of utility, people still have expectations to find love. People still want to find these sort of things. They're not bought in by it. That is like the pack too much things in, like packing things in one basket. So even on the utility calculus, like when you have more aspects, that is, you're trying to find the maximal utility by finding a partner who's providing you the most financial, the best sex of your life, or all these sort of things. And you have one partner who's giving you emotional fulfillment that you need on a daily basis to survive. And both of these are not codependent. That is like my emotional fulfillment is not affected by the capacity of how much that person is able to pay me, how their jobs play by in the system. When that ends up happening, is I'm able to maximize both of those aspects. So I'm able to maximize the love metric that exists, and I'm also able to maximize utility metric. I think this aspect of like the debate that Rand brings you like wins the debate by us on outright, right? Now, OG might try to claim this impact by noting that they talked about open marriages and hookup culture, right? But I want to clearly note that our framing is much deeper than just you can still have sex, right? Our framing is that marriages of utility embrace a contractual vision of marriage, which leaves room for extramarital love. And we give this explanation for why your partner will tolerate you pursuing love outside of a relationship, a link which OG lacks in this debate, so they cannot access the benefits that we are talking about. I'll take CO now.
So if these kinds of marriages are so available to all people, can you name to me any two famous people that are in this kind of marriage?
I think, again, I don't think it's a societal aspect of the debate. That is like what is available societally. I don't think this is a utilitarian debate about like where you can maximize your utility if you're trying to gain this. I think the question here is, what should the institution of marriage itself be? And the question you ask first before you start entering into a relationship. That is, sure, like maybe it doesn't happen immediately. Maybe it's something that's only maintained by the rich. But note that there's a trickle-down effect. That is only if the rich people are engaging in these conversations and they engage in it when media like glamorizes them, for example, in doing these sort of things. So when media shows like these
these people engaging in these kind of relationship, and the poor people see these people doing these sort of things. I think that's how the trickling down happens. So when poor people see the rich people engaging in these like different compartmentalization of marriage, that's when the trickling down happens. That's when you're able to then gain all of these utile benefits that you want to get, which means like this system of like marriage deconstruction happens far, far better on our side of the house, right? I also take O just for engagement.
Yeah, CG doesn't need utility marriage, just love marriage where you don't impose all financial and career obligations on each other. So you need to beat our coercion content, which explains why this is way worse on your side.
Sure, but what you're arguing for here is a relationship in which you have maximal utility and maximal love. That's your version of the debate O is trying to run. That is, you're able to get all sorts of fulfillment that you want from multiple places. You get perfect preference allocation, which note is an aspect of utility itself. That is me being able to get the same set of preferences, me being able to enjoy the same set of movies. It's also a utile metric that you're looking into things, the amount of things that give you joy. When that becomes the aspect of the case, what you're trying to go for is a very trivial burden of like maximizing utility in love. So that is the very best case of love that you're trying to defend on offside of the house, right? And I think like, of course, like those situations, you're also maximizing utility. So on our side also, you can find partners which maximize utility, are also love partners. Maybe you don't need to move out. But I think for vast majority of people, when Ryan tells you that this trade-off occurs, it occurs in the form with like you have to choose between these two given situations, right? That is like for majority of people, this trade-off might not exist. For a vast majority of people, there might be a trade-off that exists in these situations where you when your life depends on utile benefits. So you cannot choose. Maybe you love someone. Maybe you love someone inherently, but you're not getting utile benefits of this. Note the elucidation that exists, right? This is like being in a love in a relationship with someone where you absolutely love them. You absolutely care for them. They mean very deeply to you and you care for them fundamentally. But every aspect that you do, like every moment that you spend around them, the fact that they're not able to emotionally fulfill you, the fact that they're not able to provide for you, all of these instances means that you're not getting those utile benefits. The question then is this situation, should you like marry this person or should you marry someone else and continue loving on this person? And I think that's where rise extension becomes the most impactful in the round. That is, it tells you that in these situations, you have the capacity to move out. And when you change the fundamental structure of marriage in this particular way, you're able to gain these particular benefits, right? So what do we do to you? We tell you that like all of OG's utility calculus is not the burden that the comparative that they're trying to pull, because they never question the aspect of marriage. I think Ryan does that for you. But Ryan actually identifies the perfect trade-off, like the places where this actually matter and the places where this debate takes place, and tells you in those situations, these should be the choices you should be making. Very proud to propose.